If you're lying in bed right now trying to fall asleep, imagine this. In the Middle Ages, people didn't always sleep the way we do. Today, most of us think of sleep as one long block, maybe 7 or 8 hours if we're lucky. But in medieval Europe, people believed in something called 2 sleeps, the first sleep and the second sleep. This strange pattern of rest was not unusual. In fact, it was the normal way of life for centuries. And the more you learn about it, the more it feels like stepping into a very different world, a world where night was not a single quiet stretch, but a time of pauses, prayers, and even secret adventures. The rhythm of the night. Let us set the scene. Picture a small medieval village in England around the year 1400. The houses are dark, built of wood and thatch, with only the faint glow of firelight inside. As the sun goes down, the entire village begins to quiet. Chickens settle, goats bleat one last time, and people crawl into their straw-filled mattresses, exhausted from long days of farming, weaving, or cooking. The first part of the night begins early. People go to bed not at 11 or midnight, but often at 8 or 9 in the evening when darkness fully covers the land. After a few hours, they sink into what they called their first sleep. This sleep was considered the deepest, the most restful. Families often slept side by side on the same bedding, wrapped in blankets or animal skins. But here is the strange thing. People didn't stay asleep until morning. Around midnight, many naturally woke up. They did not see this as unusual. Instead, they called it the watch or the waking time, the natural pause between first sleep and second sleep. What people did between sleeps. So, what did medieval villagers do in this odd midnight period? The answer might surprise you. Some stayed in bed quietly, whispering prayers or simply thinking. Others got up to stoke the fire, check on animals, or even step outside. Imagine the night air, crisp, cold, and silent, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the tolling of a distant church bell. In some places, people used the midnight hours for conversation. Husbands and wives whispered to each other about family matters or shared secrets. Parents might comfort children who had woken. Neighbors sometimes visited each other, carrying small lanterns across the dark lanes. For the more devout, this period was perfect for prayer. Many believed midnight was a sacred time when the veil between heaven and earth was thinner. Monks, of course, had strict schedules and rose from their beds to chant psalms at this hour. Ordinary villagers might kneel by their beds and whisper a pater noster or two. And then, of course, there were less holy activities. Court records from the Middle Ages tell us that some people used this midnight waking to sneak out and meet lovers in secret. Others might enjoy a late-night mug of ale, especially in towns with taverns that stayed open through the night. It was a time of opportunity, both sacred and sinful. The return to second sleep. After an hour or two of wakefulness, people usually grew drowsy again. They slipped back into bed, curling into the warmth of their family or their pile of straw. This was the second sleep, lighter but still important. It often lasted until dawn, when roosters crowed and the first light of day broke through tiny windows. Waking after the second sleep felt natural to them. The body, they believed, was refreshed not by one long block of unconsciousness, but by this divided rhythm: deep rest first, then a pause for thought or prayer, and then a lighter rest before morning work. Evidence of 2 sleeps. You might be wondering, how do we know all this? It almost sounds like folklore, but historians have found strong evidence in diaries, medical books, and even court records from the medieval world. For example, the French physician Laurent Joubert wrote in 1579 about the first sleep being the deepest. In English court records, criminals sometimes confessed to crimes they committed between the first sleep and the second. And in literature, the pattern is mentioned casually, as though everyone understood it. Even as late as the 17th century, people still spoke of first sleep and second sleep. It was only after the invention of artificial lighting, street lamps, candles, and eventually gas and electric light, that people gradually shifted to a single, continuous block of rest. Why did it change? Why don't we sleep this way anymore? The answer lies in light. In the medieval period, people lived by the sun. They worked while it was bright, and they rested when it was dark. Long winter nights meant more hours in bed, which naturally encouraged waking up halfway through. But as cities grew and candles became cheaper, people stayed awake later into the night. Instead of going to bed at 8, they might stay up until 10 or 11, shrinking the window of time available for 2 sleeps. Eventually, the habit faded away. By the 1800s in most places, the idea of first sleep sounded old-fashioned. Imagining it for yourself now, as you lie in bed listening to this story, imagine living in that world. The night is not one long silence, but 2 stretches of sleep with a soft, thoughtful pause in between. You wake around midnight, sit up in the dim glow of the fire, perhaps whisper a prayer, or step outside into the cold air where stars glimmer above your small village. After an hour, you crawl back beneath your blanket, sharing warmth with family or perhaps with a traveler who has joined your household for the night. You drift off again into your second sleep, light and dreamy, until the faint crow of a rooster calls you back to the waking world. It is slow, gentle, and strangely peaceful. Perhaps not such a bad rhythm after all. Closing thought. So the next time you wake up in the middle of the night and wonder why your body has disturbed your rest, remember this. For centuries, that was exactly what people expected. Waking at midnight wasn't a problem. It was the rhythm of life, the rhythm of 2 sleeps. And with that thought, perhaps it is time for you to close your eyes, let your own first sleep begin, and imagine yourself drifting into the quiet of a medieval night. If you are lying comfortably now, about to drift into sleep, picture this. In the medieval world, having your own private bed was not common. In fact, sleeping alone was considered unusual, even suspicious. Instead, people often shared beds, sometimes with family, sometimes with friends, and quite often with complete strangers. It may sound strange to us today, in a world where privacy is treasured and hotel rooms are carefully booked by the night. But in the Middle Ages, communal sleeping was normal. Let's step into that world slowly, one scene at a time, and discover what it was like to fall asleep surrounded not by silence, but by the warmth and breath of others. Family beds in peasant homes. Imagine a poor peasant cottage. The house is small, 1 or 2 rooms at most, with a hearth for cooking, a rough table, and a bed made of straw or reeds stuffed into a wooden frame. At night, the entire family piles into the same sleeping space. Father, mother, children, all pressed together under a blanket of wool or fur. Infants might sleep at the foot of the bed, while older children curled against their parents. There was no concept of separate bedrooms for kids. Families relied on each other's body heat in the cold, drafty rooms. To modern ears, it may sound crowded, even uncomfortable, but to them, it was security. You were not alone in the dark. You were surrounded by warmth, breathing, familiar voices, and the steady beat of your family's hearts. Beds in inns and taverns. Now, imagine traveling on the road in medieval England or France. You are a merchant, a pilgrim, or perhaps a wandering scholar. The day is long, the road is rough, and by nightfall you search for a place to rest. You enter a small roadside inn. Inside, it is smoky with firelight. The innkeeper nods and offers you a bed, but not your own. Instead, you are led to a chamber where several straw mattresses lie side by side, or even one giant bed built for 6 or 8 people. There, you climb in next to strangers. On one side may be a weary farmer, on the other, a monk traveling between abbeys. You do not know them, but tonight you will sleep shoulder to shoulder. Court records from the time reveal that it was entirely normal to bed share with people you had never met. Some even reported forming friendships during these nights. Of course, there were risks, pickpockets, wandering hands, or lice, but the practice was so widespread that nobody thought it scandalous. To sleep alone would have been lonelier and, in many cases, less safe. Servants and masters. Even in noble houses, privacy was rare. A wealthy lord or lady might have a grand bed, tall and curtained, but they rarely slept entirely alone. Servants sometimes lay on pallets nearby, ready to attend to their master if needed in the night. Children of the household might also share the chamber. Beds were symbols of wealth. A noble bed was not just a place of rest, but a stage of ceremony. When important guests arrived, they were sometimes invited to sit or even lie upon the bed as part of formal hospitality. Sharing the bed became a sign of trust and closeness, trust in shared sleep. This brings us to something important. In medieval thought, sharing a bed was an act of trust. To sleep beside someone was to let your guard down completely. At night, you were vulnerable, defenseless, breathing slowly in the dark. If you trusted a person enough to share your sleep, it meant you trusted them with your life. This is why bed sharing often created bonds. Soldiers shared beds in barracks. Monks in monasteries sometimes lay side by side on simple mats. Travelers formed temporary alliances in crowded inns. To fall asleep next to someone was to accept them into your circle of safety. The sounds and smells of the night. Of course, we should not romanticize it too much. Medieval communal sleeping also meant dealing with the realities of human bodies. Imagine the snores of 6 people at once, the creak of straw, the smell of sweat and unwashed clothes. There was no soft white noise machine, no clean hotel sheets, no gentle air conditioning. Instead, there was the hot, crowded closeness of bodies packed together. For many, this was simply life. They did not expect silence. The night was full of sounds, the cough of a neighbor, the whimper of a child, the shifting of feet. Moral concerns. Naturally, church leaders worried about the dangers of so much shared sleeping. Moralists warned that bed sharing could lead to temptation or sin, especially when men and women who were not married ended up in the same space. Some monasteries strictly separated monks to avoid trouble. Yet in many cases, practicality won out over strict rules. On cold nights, warmth mattered more than virtue. On busy roads, beds were expensive, so sharing was unavoidable. People simply adapted, creating unwritten rules of courtesy. Don't steal the blanket, don't crowd too close, and don't disturb your fellow sleeper. Children learning to sleep, children too, grew up learning to share. They did not have soft cribs or pastel-painted bedrooms. Instead, they learned to sleep through noise and company. A child might be sandwiched between parents one night and between siblings the next. By adulthood, sleeping in the presence of others felt completely natural. The slow shift to privacy. So, when did we move from communal sleeping to private bedrooms? The change came slowly, beginning with the wealthy. By the 16th and 17th centuries, noble families began to build larger houses with more rooms. Beds became larger, more decorated, and more personal. Curtains enclosed the sleeper, giving at least the illusion of privacy. As time passed, the idea of sharing a bed with strangers faded. By the 18th and 19th centuries, privacy became a sign of refinement. The wealthy began to see solitary sleep as proper and civilized, while bed sharing came to be seen as backward, even dirty. But in the medieval world we are describing, none of this applied. To share a bed was normal, it was practical, it was human. Imagining the scene. Now as you listen, close your eyes and picture yourself as a traveler. You arrive at a medieval inn. The fire is glowing in the hearth. You climb the wooden stairs and find a great bed, already half filled with sleeping figures. You quietly slide in, the straw rustling beneath you. A stranger breathes heavily at your side. Another shifts in their sleep. It is not private, it is not silent, but it is safe. Your body warms against the presence of others. Outside the wind howls, but inside you are not alone. Slowly, your breathing joins theirs, and you drift into the strange, crowded, but comforting world of communal medieval sleep. Closing thought today, most of us would be shocked to sleep with strangers, but for hundreds of years, it was the way of life. In their world, sleep was not an isolated act, but a shared one. a human chain of warmth against the dark. And with that image, let your own bed, whether shared or private, carry you into rest tonight. Night watches, midnight activity. If you close your eyes and imagine the Middle Ages, you may picture a village fast asleep, every cottage dark, the only sound a rooster or the distant bark of a dog. But the truth is stranger. Medieval nights were not entirely silent. For many people, the middle of the night was not simply for sleeping. It was a time for work, prayer, or even wandering. In fact, in towns and cities, the hours after midnight often belonged to the watchmen. The men who guarded the streets, rang the bells, and sometimes even sang out warnings. So tonight, let us walk through the quiet hours of a medieval night, exploring how people lived, worked, and sometimes even played, while others dreamed. The Town Watch. In most medieval towns, there was always someone awake. This was the job of the night watchman. Picture a man in rough cloak and hood, carrying a lantern and a staff. He walks slowly through the cobbled streets, his footsteps echoing between timber-framed houses. His job is to guard against thieves, fires, and other dangers. He might call out the hour, midnight, and all is well, a custom that survived in some places for centuries. In some towns, bells rang every hour of the night, not just to mark time, but to reassure the sleepers that the watch was awake. For those lying in their straw beds, the sound of the bell was like a lullaby of safety. Why the night was dangerous, but why was a night watch needed? Because medieval nights were often dangerous. With no street lamps, cities were dark and shadowed. Thieves prowled, fires spread quickly through wooden houses, and quarrels sometimes broke out after too much ale. For women, traveling alone after dark was especially risky. Even men avoided long journeys at night, unless absolutely necessary. The road between villages could be full of dangers, wild animals, bandits, or simply getting lost in the dark. So the presence of a night watchman was comforting, though not always effective. Records show that watchmen sometimes fell asleep at their posts, or joined in the drinking themselves. Still, their presence gave towns a rhythm of safety through the dark hours. Midnight as activity time now. Let us return to the idea of two sleeps, which we learned about earlier. Because people often woke around midnight, the night became a strange period of activity. Some rose to pray, believing midnight was a holy hour when the soul could connect more closely to heaven. Monks and nuns, of course, were required to rise from their beds for midnight prayers, chanting psalms in the flicker of candlelight. Ordinary villagers, too, might kneel by the hearth for a whispered prayer before returning to bed. Others used the midnight hours for practical work. Bakers sometimes began kneading dough long before dawn, so fresh bread would be ready in the morning market. Brewers stirred their ale. Farmers checked on their animals. Blacksmiths prepared tools for the next day. The village, half asleep, half awake, moved in a quiet rhythm between darkness and light. Noisy nights in towns. In bigger towns, however, the night was not always peaceful. Records from medieval London and Paris describe taverns still open after midnight. Alehouses glowed with firelight as men drank, sang, and sometimes fought. For this reason, curfew laws existed. A bell was rung in the evening to signal that people should put out their fires and return home. But curfews were often ignored. The noise of laughter, music, and shouting sometimes spilled into the streets, keeping neighbors awake. The watchman had to deal with drunks wandering home, or worse, brawls in the alleys. So if you imagine lying in bed in a medieval town, the night might not be silent at all. You could hear the toll of bells, the calls of watchmen, the faint laughter from a tavern, and the muffled steps of someone hurrying home through the dark. The stillness of villages. In contrast, country villages were quieter. After a day of hard work in the fields, most peasants went to bed soon after sundown. Yet even here, night was not empty. Farmers sometimes woke to check on animals. Mothers rose to feed infants. Neighbors might gather by the hearth during the waking hours between first and second sleep. In winter, when nights were long, the darkness stretched endlessly. Some used the midnight pause for spinning wool, mending clothes, or telling stories by the fire. For them, night was not simply sleep, it was another time of living. Night as sacred and superstitious. The night also carried spiritual weight. Midnight was believed to be a time when spirits walked. People feared ghosts, witches, and demons in the hours after dark. Many believed that evil was strongest between midnight and 3 o'clock, the so-called witching hours. So the prayers said during the midnight waking were not just pious habits, they were protection. Whispering a charm, crossing oneself, or sprinkling holy water was thought to keep away dangers of the unseen world. This is another reason why watchmen were important. Their steady walk through the streets, their lanterns cutting the dark, were not only a guard against thieves but also against fears of spirits and unseen evils. Imagining a walk through the night. Now let us take a slow walk through a medieval city at midnight. The moon is high, silvering the rooftops. The streets are mostly empty, but here and there a lantern glows. You hear the distant clatter of hooves as a late rider passes. From an open tavern door, faint music drifts into the night. A watchman walks past, nodding at you, his staff tapping on the stones. You pass a bakery, where the smell of warm bread already fills the air. The night is not silent. It is alive in small, scattered ways. A city breathing softly in its sleep, but never fully still. Closing. Thought for medieval people, the night was never just for sleeping. It was a time of watchfulness, work, prayer, and sometimes mischief. The darkness was full of life, both human and spiritual. So tonight, as you hear the quiet hum of your own world, think of those old nights when bells rang every hour, when watchmen called through the streets, and when people stirred quietly in their homes between first sleep and second. The medieval night was never truly empty. It was full of whispers, footsteps, and the steady watch of those who stayed awake. Noble beds versus peasant straw. As you rest now, tucked into your own bed, let us travel back to the Middle Ages and imagine how different sleep was depending on who you were. In those times, a bed was not just a place to rest. It was a symbol of your entire place in society. For the poor, it meant rough straw on the floor. For the rich, it meant towering, luxurious furniture draped in silks and guarded like treasure. The distance between noble sleep and peasant sleep was as vast as the distance between castles and cottages. So let us slowly explore this strange contrast, one soft step at a time. The peasant's bed, straw and simplicity. Picture a humble cottage in a small village. The walls are of mud and timber, the roof thatched, the floor made of earth. There is no soft mattress waiting in the corner. Instead, there is a simple straw pallet, a sack or frame stuffed with hay, reeds, or dried leaves. The word mattress, in fact, comes from the Arabic matra, meaning something thrown down. That was exactly what peasants had. Straw thrown onto the floor, sometimes with a rough sheet on top. It was scratchy, itchy, and full of pests. Fleas and lice thrived in the bedding, and the straw had to be changed regularly, though many families used it long past comfort. Peasants often slept many to a bed, husband, wife, children, sometimes even grandparents. The warmth of bodies was the real blanket, especially in winter. Pets or livestock might be nearby too, adding heat but also noise and smell. This was the bed of the common person, simple, hard, functional. It offered little comfort, but it was a place to close weary eyes after a long day in the fields. The noble's bed, grandeur and ceremony. Now, step into a castle or a great manor. The noble's bed could not be more different. Here stood a four-poster bed, raised high above the cold stone floor, sometimes so tall it required steps to climb in. These beds were not just for sleeping, they were status symbols. The frame was carved from oak or walnut, the posts heavy and decorated with patterns. Around it hung thick curtains, not only for privacy but for warmth. The curtains trapped heat in drafty stone rooms and gave the sleeper a sense of enclosed security. The mattress was stuffed with feathers or wool, far softer than straw. Sheets might be made of linen, blankets of fine wool, and the covers decorated with embroidery. For the very wealthy, silks and velvets covered the bed, glowing in candlelight. Servants prepared these beds carefully, sometimes even warming them with hot stones before their master retired for the night. To sleep in such a bed was not only comfortable, but a daily ritual of luxury. Beds as a public stage. Unlike the peasant bed, which was entirely private, the noble bed was sometimes public. Guests might be received in a lord or lady's chamber, and even sit upon the bed as a sign of honor. Important conversations took place in bedchambers, with the great bed serving as a symbol of power. In royal courts, beds became part of ceremony. Kings held audiences from their beds, receiving petitions while propped against pillows. To be invited to share or even sit near a bed was a mark of closeness. Thus, while peasants saw their beds as mere tools, nobles saw theirs as symbols, thrones of the night, the middle ground. Of course, not everyone was at the extremes of rich or poor. Wealthy merchants or skilled craftsmen in towns often owned beds that were modest but comfortable. A wooden frame, a wool-stuffed mattress, a few linen sheets. These families had more comfort than peasants, though not the splendor of nobility. They too might hang curtains, not out of luxury, but to keep in heat during freezing winters. For them, a bed was a mix of necessity and pride, showing that they were respectable, successful, and above the rough straw of the poor. The daily care of beds. Another striking difference was in maintenance. A noble household employed servants who shook out mattresses, brushed sheets, and replaced linens. Feathers were fluffed, blankets folded, and pests hunted. For peasants, care was minimal. Straw pallets grew damp, dirty, and full of vermin. Sometimes the bedding doubled as feed for animals when it was too old for human use. Beds were not refreshed daily, but only when absolutely necessary. This difference in care meant that sleep itself felt different. For nobles, bed was a retreat into warmth and softness. For peasants, it was endurance, a place to collapse, not to luxuriate. The symbolism of height. One of the most striking details of noble beds was their height. Raised far above the ground, they showed that the sleeper was elevated, not only physically, but socially. In some cases, people even believed it was healthier to sleep higher, away from the dampness of the floor. Peasants, by contrast, often slept almost on the ground itself, close to the earth. The symbolism could not have been stronger. Nobles floating in comfort above, peasants pressed close to the dirt below. Imagining both worlds. Now let us pause and imagine. You are a peasant, lying on straw. The floor is hard beneath you. The straw rustles with each turn and you scratch at the itch of fleas. Your children are curled at your side, the dog asleep at your feet, and outside, the wind rattles the shutters. It is rough, but it is life. You drift into sleep because you are exhausted. Now imagine instead you are a noble, climbing into a feather bed. Servants draw heavy curtains around you, shutting out the draft. The mattress sinks beneath your weight. Embroidered covers wrap you in warmth. A candle flickers low, casting golden light on velvet drapes. You feel not only comfort, but power. Sleep comes softly, like a privilege granted only to the few. Closing thought. So, in the Middle Ages, the bed you slept in told the story of your entire life. Straw or feathers, floor or four-poster, shared or guarded by servants, it reflected your place in the great ladder of society. And as you settle into your own bed tonight, soft or firm, private or shared, remember that for centuries, sleep was not just about rest. It was about status, survival, and the quiet symbols of who you were. If you are lying down now, perhaps with your head resting softly on a pillow, imagine instead trying to sleep sitting up, your back propped against a wall or a pile of cushions. It may seem uncomfortable to us, but in the Middle Ages, many people thought this was the right and safe way to sleep. Why? The reasons were a mixture of medicine, fear, and practicality. So tonight, let's slowly explore the world of upright medieval sleep, a habit shaped by strange beliefs, health concerns, and the dangers of the night. Beds built for sitting. When we picture a medieval bed, we often imagine someone lying flat beneath heavy blankets. But many noble beds were designed with high backs and plenty of pillows, making it easy for the sleeper to rest in a half-seated position. Manuscript illustrations show lords and ladies reclining against piles of cushions, much like sitting in a chair. Even when lying down fully, they often rested with the head and shoulders raised rather than flat. This wasn't only about comfort. To medieval people, lying completely flat looked too much like death. A body stretched flat on its back resembled a corpse laid out for burial. Sleeping upright, in contrast, felt alive, alert, and safer. The fear of bad air. Medieval medicine also supported upright sleep. Doctors of the time followed the ancient teachings of Hippocrates and Galen, who believed in the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They thought that lying flat could cause these fluids to pool in the body in harmful ways. For example, it was believed that lying flat after eating could lead to corruption of the humors or dangerous indigestion. Physicians recommended sleeping with the head raised so that the body could digest the vapors more easily. In particular, people feared choking in their sleep. Upright sleeping was thought to prevent suffocation. Even today, when you are ill with a cough or cold, you may prop yourself up to breathe better. So in some ways, their practice was not entirely foolish. Practical reasons in noble houses. Nobles in castles had another reason to sit up in bed: draughts and smoke. Stone chambers were cold, with fires burning in hearths that sometimes filled the room with smoke. Sleeping upright, surrounded by curtains, meant you could breathe more easily without choking on bad air. In addition, the wealthy often ate heavy suppers. Reclining with the head raised was believed to help digestion. A full belly and flat sleep were considered a dangerous mix. The peasants' upright rest. Peasants too sometimes slept sitting or half-sitting, but for very different reasons. In tiny cottages, space was limited. Some households used benches or stools for sleeping naps, and some even rested upright by the fire through cold nights. Travelers on the road also slept sitting up in chairs or propped against walls, especially in crowded inns where beds were scarce. For poor folk, upright sleep was less about medicine and more about necessity. If you didn't have space to stretch out, you simply learned to rest sitting up. Fear of night attacks. Another reason people chose not to lie flat was fear. In an age of weak locks, open doors, and roaming thieves, being completely stretched out felt too vulnerable. Upright or half-sitting sleep meant you could wake faster and defend yourself if needed. This fear was not baseless. Chronicles tell of travelers robbed in their sleep, soldiers surprised by raids, and even noble households attacked at night. Sleeping propped up with weapons nearby gave a sense of readiness. The spiritual fear of death beyond physical danger, there was also spiritual fear. Lying flat was again the posture of the dead. Many medieval people worried that if they slept too deeply in that position, they might not wake at all. In a world where illness could strike suddenly, this belief gave comfort. Sitting upright, you were less likely to slip away in the night. Some even believed that spirits or demons pressed more easily on sleepers who lay flat, so sitting up gave protection. The chair beds. In some homes, particularly monasteries, there were chair beds, large wooden chairs with arms, where monks or servants might sleep upright through the night. These were not comfortable by our standards, but they allowed someone to rest lightly while still being ready to rise for prayer or duty. In some cases, elderly people or those with breathing trouble spent much of their nights in these chairs, just as people today sometimes do when sick. Sleeping upright in artwork. Medieval art reflects this practice. Paintings and manuscripts often show people in bed, not lying flat, but reclining on pillows, reading, praying, or simply resting with heads raised. Saints and nobles alike are depicted this way, reinforcing the idea that upright sleep was dignified and proper. Imagining the scene. Now, let us picture yourself in a medieval chamber. You are a nobleman or lady, climbing into a tall curtained bed. Servants arrange pillows behind you, raising your head and shoulders. The fire burns low in the hearth, smoke curling upward. You breathe easier, sitting higher, and you feel safer. Less like a corpse, more like someone still awake to the world. Or imagine instead that you are a poor traveler. You sit on a bench in a crowded inn, cloak wrapped tightly, head against the wall. You doze upright, one eye half open, hand resting on your purse for safety. Around you, others snore in the same position. The night passes not in deep, stretched slumber, but in short bursts of upright rest. Closing thought. So while we stretch out comfortably today, for many in the Middle Ages, lying flat was unwise, unhealthy, and even frightening. To them, the safest path to sleep was not flat on the back, but propped up, half in the waking world, half in dreams. And as you lie down tonight, fully stretched, safe and at ease, remember those who came before, resting upright through the long medieval night, always balancing between rest and readiness. As you prepare to drift into sleep, think for a moment about your last dream. Perhaps it was strange, perhaps it was joyful, perhaps it made no sense at all. Today most of us dismiss dreams as the odd flickering of the brain, but in the Middle Ages, dreams were far more important. To medieval people, a dream was a message, sometimes from God, sometimes from the devil, sometimes from the hidden depths of the soul. And because sleep was so full of meaning, people took their dreams seriously. Entire books were written to explain them. Kings listened to dreams before making decisions. Priests warned about the dangers of false visions. Tonight, let us walk softly through this world of medieval dreams, a place where every vision of the night carried weight, and where sleep was never just rest. The ancient roots of dream beliefs. Medieval ideas about dreams were not entirely their own. They inherited them from the ancient Greeks and Romans. The writings of Aristotle, Cicero, and Galen shaped how Europeans thought about the night. For example, Aristotle wrote that some dreams were simply natural, caused by food, health, or mood, while others could reveal truths. Roman authors believed that dreams could predict the future. When Christianity spread, these ideas mixed with the Bible's many stories of dreams. Joseph dreaming of angels, Pharaoh's dreams of famine, the visions of prophets. So, by the Middle Ages, the dream was seen as a doorway, sometimes opening to heaven, sometimes to danger. Dream books and their meanings. If you lived in the Middle Ages and woke from a strange dream, you might consult a dream book. These were collections of explanations listing hundreds of possible visions and their meanings. For example, to dream of flying meant joy and freedom. To dream of falling meant danger or sin. To dream of teeth falling out meant death in the family. To dream of water meant change, often depending on whether it was calm or stormy. Dream books circulated widely, even though the church sometimes frowned on them. People copied them by hand, passed them from one to another, and treated them almost like secret guides to the mysteries of sleep. Dreams as divine messages. Some dreams were thought to come directly from God. A vision of a saint, an angel, or a shining light could be seen as a holy message. In monasteries, monks sometimes recorded dreams in which saints instructed them to pray, to build a chapel, or to change their ways. Kings and lords, too, took dreams seriously. Chronicles tell of rulers making decisions after seeing visions in the night. A dream of victory might encourage a battle. A dream of disaster might lead to retreat. Because of this, some rulers even employed advisors to interpret dreams, treating them like omens. The danger of demonic dreams. But dreams were not always trusted. Many feared that demons could enter the mind during sleep. A strange or disturbing dream might be seen as a trick of the devil, meant to lead someone astray. Priests warned that not all vision should be believed. A holy dream might encourage prayer, but a sinful dream might tempt someone toward lust, anger, or despair. This fear gave rise to rituals of protection, saying a prayer before bed, sprinkling holy water, or hanging charms to guard the sleeper's mind. Everyday people and their dreams. For ordinary villagers, dreams played a role in daily life. A farmer might dream of a good harvest and see it as a sign of luck. A mother might dream of losing a child and take it as a warning to be careful. Dreams were woven into stories, too. Folk tales often included visions that foretold the future, guiding heroes or warning them of danger. Children grew up hearing such tales, believing that the night could whisper secrets to those who listened. Medical beliefs about dreams. Medieval doctors also had their say. They believed that dreams could reveal the health of the body. For example, if someone dreamed of fire, it was said to mean their body had too much heat. If they dreamed of water, perhaps they had too much phlegm. Dreams, in this way, became part of diagnosis. A doctor might ask a patient what they had dreamed recently to better understand their illness. This was tied to the theory of humors, where the body's fluids shaped health, mood, and even dreams. A heavy meal before bed, they warned, could lead to disturbing visions. Visions of the dead. One of the most haunting beliefs was that the dead could appear in dreams. To dream of a deceased relative was sometimes seen as a visitation. People thought the dead could ask for prayers or even warn the living of danger. In villages, such dreams were taken very seriously. A widow dreaming of her husband might tell the priest the next day. A farmer dreaming of a dead neighbor might light candles in the church. To them, dreams blurred the line between this world and the next. Imagining a night of medieval dreams now, close your eyes and picture a medieval sleeper. Perhaps it is a monk in a monastery. He lies on his narrow cot, wrapped in a woolen blanket. In his dream, a saint appears, telling him to rise and pray. He wakes in the dark, convinced he has been touched by heaven. Or perhaps it is a peasant woman. She dreams of a flood rushing through her village. She wakes in fear, convinced it is a warning. She tells her family, and they watch the skies with worry. Or maybe it is a nobleman. He dreams of victory in battle. In the morning, he gathers his knights with confidence, certain that God has promised him success. In each case, the dream is not random, it is a message. Closing thought. So in the medieval world, dreams were never meaningless. They were windows into the soul, whispers from heaven, or tricks from demons. To dream was to stand at the edge of mystery, halfway between the earthly and the divine. As you close your eyes tonight, think of those who came before, listening closely to the voices of their dreams, wondering whether they carried truth, danger, or hope. And perhaps when you drift into sleep, you may dream too. And remember, for them, every dream matters. Sleeping with animals. As you settle into your bed tonight, imagine for a moment that you are not alone. At your feet lies a dog. By the door, chickens rustle. In the corner, a pig snores softly. This may sound unusual to us, but in the Middle Ages, it was completely normal. For peasants and villagers, animals were not only part of the farm, they were part of the household. At night, when the cold crept in and thieves lurked outside, animals shared the space of sleep. Sometimes they were kept for warmth, sometimes for protection, sometimes simply because there was nowhere else to put them. Tonight, let us explore this strange and crowded world of medieval sleeping with animals. The peasant cottage picture, a small peasant house. It is one room with a fire in the center, smoke drifting upward through a hole in the roof. In this tiny space lives a family of 5 or 6, and their animals. Cows, goats, or sheep might be brought indoors at night, especially in winter. Chickens roosted on beams or in baskets near the hearth. A pig might be tied in a corner, grunting softly as it dozed. Dogs and cats wandered freely. The family lay down on their straw mattress, and the animals settled nearby. The warmth of beasts and humans together kept the chill away. To us, it may sound dirty and noisy, but to them, it was survival. Warmth and protection. Why did people allow animals into their homes and sleeping spaces? The most important reason was warmth. Peasant houses were drafty, with no insulation. Winters were long and brutal. A cow or goat inside the house could raise the temperature noticeably. Even a pig gave off heat. Families who could not afford thick blankets relied on the living warmth of their animals. The second reason was protection. Animals were valuable. A cow or sheep was wealth, milk, meat, and future generations. Leaving them outside in the dark meant risking theft or wolf attacks. By bringing them inside, families kept them safe. the noise of the night. Of course, sleeping with animals was far from peaceful. Imagine trying to drift off while a pig shifted in its pen, chickens clucked and flapped above, and goats bleated suddenly in the dark. Dogs barked at the faintest noise, and cats prowled after mice. The medieval night was alive with sound. To modern ears, it might seem chaotic, yet people grew used to it. The noises of animals were part of their lullaby, just as city dwellers today grow used to the hum of traffic. Animals in noble houses. Even in castles and manors, animals were never far away. Though nobles had separate stables for their horses and barns for their livestock, dogs often shared the chambers of their masters. Hunting dogs and lapdogs slept by the beds of lords and ladies. Cats, too, prowled inside, valued for keeping away mice. In illuminated manuscripts, you can find pictures of cats curled at the foot of a bed, or even chasing mice across the margins of holy texts. So whether you were peasant or noble, the medieval sleeper was rarely without the company of animals, travelers and inns. For travelers, the situation could be even more crowded. Inns were already full of strangers sharing beds. Add to that the animals travelers brought with them: donkeys, chickens, or even goats. These creatures often spent the night in the same building as their owners. Records from medieval courts even mention quarrels over animals disturbing guests in inns, chickens scratching, dogs fighting, or pigs escaping their corners. To travel was to accept the noise and presence of beasts in the night. Religious views of sleeping with animals. The church sometimes criticized this practice, especially when animals were allowed too close to holy things. Priests warned that sleeping side by side with beasts was improper. Some sermons mocked peasants for living like animals, with no sense of dignity. But necessity overruled judgment. For the poor, survival was more important than rules. A warm house, even if crowded with animals, was better than freezing. Medical beliefs. Interestingly, some medieval doctors believed that sleeping near animals could be unhealthy. They warned that the vapors or smells of beasts might harm the body, corrupting the humors. The stink of pigs, especially, was thought to cause illness. Yet for most families, there was no choice. Medical advice mattered little when a cow inside could mean life through a harsh winter. Imagining the scene. Close your eyes now and imagine a winter's night in a peasant hut. The wind howls outside. Snow presses against the door. Inside, the family huddles together under a rough blanket. Beside them, a pig shifts, warm and heavy. Chickens cluck softly on the rafters. A dog curls at the foot of the bed, ears twitching in his sleep. The smell of hay and smoke fills the air. It is crowded, noisy, and far from clean, but it is safe and it is warm. For them, this was comfort. For them, this was home. Closing thought. So while today we keep our pets politely at the edge of the bed, or perhaps not at all, medieval sleepers shared their nights with creatures of every size. Sleep was not private, it was communal, noisy, warm, and sometimes chaotic. And as you settle down tonight, perhaps with a cat at your feet or a dog nearby, think of those who once drifted into dreams surrounded by the sounds of clucking hens, grunting pigs, and the steady breath of cattle. Companions of the medieval night. The watchmen and night bells. As you lie in bed tonight, imagine drifting off in a medieval town. The houses are dark, the streets narrow, the air cold. You close your eyes, but the night is not silent. Somewhere in the distance, a bell begins to toll. A slow, steady sound echoes through the streets, marking the passing of hours. Alongside it, footsteps echo, a watchman patrolling, lantern in hand, calling out to reassure the sleepers. This was the rhythm of medieval towns, the watchmen who stayed awake through the dark hours, and the bells that broke the silence of the night. Together, they gave structure, safety, and sometimes unease to those trying to sleep. The curfew bell. In many towns across Europe, the evening began with the sound of the curfew bell. The word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. When the bell rang, usually around sunset or shortly after, it was a signal. Households were to put out or cover their hearth fires. Open flames in wooden houses and thatched roofs were dangerous, and many towns feared fire more than thieves. The curfew bell reminded everyone to quiet down, settle indoors, and prepare for night. Imagine the sound of that bell drifting through a medieval town. A long, heavy ringing that told bakers, merchants, and children alike, it is time to stop, time to go inside, time to rest. The hour bells. But the bells did not stop at curfew. All through the night, bells tolled the hours. Church towers or town clocks struck at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4. For those lying awake between first and second sleep, these bells were a steady reminder of time's passing. For watchmen on patrol, they were markers of duty, keeping the rhythm of their long night. Sometimes bells rang for other reasons too, to signal danger, to call citizens to arms, or to announce the approach of dawn. The watchman's call. Alongside the bells were the watchmen, ordinary men hired or assigned to guard the streets. Some were volunteers from the townsfolk, others were paid by the city. They walked slowly through the night, carrying lanterns, staffs, or sometimes weapons. Their job was to watch for thieves, put out fires, and keep order. To show they were awake, they often called out the hours, shouting phrases like, "Midnight and all is well," 2 o'clock and God keep you safe. These cries reassured sleepers. If you woke in the dark, hearing a watchman call from the street was a comfort. Someone was awake, someone was guarding you. The fear of fire. One of the greatest dangers of medieval towns was fire. With wooden houses packed close together, a single spark could destroy an entire street. So watchmen often carried buckets of water or tools for putting out flames. They patrolled to catch fires early, and the bells rang if a blaze broke out. Sleepers might be woken suddenly by the clang of an alarm bell, rushing out to help save the town from disaster. The night bells, in this way, were not only markers of time, they were protectors of life. Life in a town at night. To imagine a medieval town at night, picture narrow lanes, lit only by the moon or a flickering torch. Windows are shuttered, doors bolted. The streets are mostly empty, except for a few figures moving in the shadows. A watchman passes, lantern swinging, staff tapping on the stones. From the church tower, a bell strikes the hour, its sound rolling across rooftops. Inside, families stir at the sound, perhaps whisper a prayer, then drift back into second sleep. For them, these sounds are normal. The night is alive with watchful presence. The problem of sleep. Yet not everyone found these bells comforting. Some complained that constant ringing disturbed sleep. Monks, who already had to rise for midnight prayers, often found the bells disruptive. In cities, the combined noise of bells, watchmen's cries, barking dogs, and drunken tavern-goers sometimes made the night anything but peaceful. To live in a town was to accept a certain restlessness after dark. Symbol of order. Still, the night bells and watchmen were symbols of order. They showed that even when the town slept, society was still awake. The bells connected people to time, to the church, to the cycle of day and night. The watchmen connected people to safety, reminding them that their lives were being guarded while they dreamed. Imagining the experience, close your eyes now and imagine you are in a medieval bed wrapped in wool, drifting into slumber. Suddenly, in the distance, a bell tolls once, twice, 3 times. You hear the faint cry of a watchman. All is well. You turn, pull the blanket closer, and let the sound carry you deeper into sleep. The bells and voices of the night become your lullaby, steady and reassuring in the dark. Closing thought. So while today our nights are marked by silent clocks and glowing screens, medieval nights were measured by sound, the clang of bells, the call of watchmen, the noises of the town breathing in its sleep. To them, the night was never fully quiet. It was structured, guarded, and punctuated by voices that reminded everyone, even in darkness, you are not alone. Night fears and demons. As you lie safe in your bed tonight, imagine trying to fall asleep in the Middle Ages. The room is dark, the only light the dying glow of a fire. The night outside is full of howling winds, barking dogs, and strange creaks. For peasants and nobles alike, sleep was never just rest, it was dangerous. Because in the medieval imagination, the night belonged to demons, witches, and spirits. And the most terrifying of all was the creature believed to sit on your chest, crushing the breath from your body, the night hag. Tonight, let us wander slowly through the fears that filled the medieval night and discover why sleep itself could feel haunted. The night hag and sleep paralysis. Many medieval people experienced what we now call sleep paralysis, the terrifying feeling of waking but being unable to move, with the sensation of weight pressing on the chest. Today, we explain it with science, but in the Middle Ages it was believed to be the work of a demon or witch. The creature had many names. In English it was the night hag. In German lands it was called the Alp or mare, a word that gave us nightmare. In Scandinavia, people feared the Mara, a spirit who pressed down on sleepers. Victims described waking in the dark to see a shadowy figure at the foot of the bed, or even sitting on their chest. They could not move, could not cry out, could barely breathe. It was the perfect terror of the night, and it shaped medieval fears of sleep itself. Demons in the night. But the night hag was not the only fear. Medieval people believed that demons were especially active after midnight, when the boundary between the human and the supernatural world grew thin. Demons were thought to whisper temptations into sleepers' ears, filling their dreams with lust, anger, or despair. Some believed demons could steal the soul during sleep. To guard against this, people prayed before bed, sprinkled holy water, or slept with charms such as crucifixes or blessed herbs. Beds were not just for comfort, they were small fortresses against spiritual attack. Witches, and the night witches too, were feared as nocturnal visitors. Stories told of witches who slipped into houses at night, riding on sleeping men's chests, or stealing the breath of children. Some believed witches could send their spirits out of their bodies while they slept, flying through the night to join others at secret gatherings. A child's sudden death in sleep was sometimes blamed on a witch's curse. The fear of witches grew especially strong in the late medieval period, when trials and accusations filled Europe with paranoia. But even in earlier centuries, the night was considered their domain. Ghosts and restless dead. The night was also haunted by the spirits of the dead. People believed that those who had not been properly buried, or who carried sins unresolved, might wander in the dark, appearing in dreams or even at bedsides. A sudden coldness in the night, a shadow in the corner, or the sound of footsteps outside the door. These could be taken as signs that the dead were near. To protect against them, prayers for the dead were common. Families lit candles, whispered blessings, and asked saints to guard the house. Animals as signs of evil. Even the sounds of animals could be unsettling. Dogs howling at midnight were thought to sense spirits. Owls hooting were seen as omens of death. A black cat staring in the dark was a symbol of witchcraft. For a medieval sleeper, every sound carried meaning. The night was never just empty. It was full of presences, some protective, many threatening. Children and night fears. Children were especially vulnerable. Parents told them bedtime prayers, not just to soothe them, but to keep demons away. Charms were hung over cradles, herbs, crosses, even knives, believed to keep witches from stealing babies in the night. Lullabies often contained warnings or protective blessings. The simple act of tucking a child into bed was filled with fear of what the darkness might bring. Monastic fears. Even in monasteries, where men and women devoted their lives to prayer, the night was feared. Monks rising for midnight prayers sometimes wrote of seeing shadows or feeling presences in the dark cloisters. They too believed demons tried hardest at night to disturb the faithful. Yet they also saw the night as holy. To pray in the darkness was to fight back against evil. Bells rang, psalms were sung, candles flickered, all acts of defiance against the terrors of the unseen. Imagining the night. Terror now. Imagine yourself as a medieval peasant. You lie on your straw bed, children beside you, animals shifting nearby. Suddenly, you wake. You cannot move. You feel a crushing weight on your chest. A shadow crouches at the edge of the bed, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. You want to cry out, but your voice is trapped. You think of the stories, the night hag, the demons, the witches. You whisper a prayer in your heart, hoping for release. Then slowly the weight fades and you gasp awake. To you, it was no dream. It was an attack. For countless medieval sleepers, this was reality. Closing thought. So while we today may laugh off a bad dream as just the mind's trick, in the Middle Ages, the night was a battlefield. Sleep was not only rest, but risk. Every dream, every shadow, every strange sensation could be a message or a menace. And yet, despite these fears, people still closed their eyes each night, whispering prayers, trusting in charms and hoping the darkness would pass them by safely. So as you drift into your own safe sleep tonight, remember, long ago, every night carried whispers of demons, witches, and spirits, and every sleeper was a small warrior, guarding their dreams against the terrors of the dark. The role of candles and fire. As you lie in your bed tonight, safe in the glow of electric light or in quiet darkness, imagine instead a world where the only light after sunset came from candles, lamps, and fire. In the Middle Ages, these were not luxuries, they were necessities. They gave comfort, chased away shadows, and guided people through the night. But they were also dangerous. A single candle, left burning near straw or cloth, could turn a house into ash. A spark from the hearth could destroy an entire street. And so, medieval sleep was shaped by both the warmth and the risk of fire. Tonight, let us walk softly through the flickering light of the medieval night, discovering how candles and fire gave people hope, fear, and a rhythm for their rest. The hearth at night. In a peasant's cottage, the fire was life. The hearth gave heat, cooked food, and lit the small room. Families often slept close to it, sometimes right beside the embers. Before bed, the fire had to be carefully tended. Too weak, and the family would freeze. Too strong, and it might spread and burn the house. The curfew bell that rang in towns, couvre-feu, cover fire, was a reminder to dampen flames before sleep. Peasants often banked the fire, covering it with ashes so that it smoldered through the night. In the morning they could stir the coals back to life, but this meant their sleep was never fully free of worry. A sudden spark could leap out, a falling log could roll onto the floor. The crackle of flames was both lullaby and threat. Candles in the chamber. For nobles, fire was not just practical but ceremonial. Great halls had roaring fireplaces glowing with heat. Bedchambers had smaller hearths, but also candles, symbols of wealth since good candles were expensive. Poor families used rushlights, thin reeds dipped in tallow or fat which burned smoky and fast. Richer families used beeswax candles which glowed brighter, cleaner, and sweeter smelling. A noble chamber at night might be lit by dozens of these candles, shimmering against tapestries and gold. Yet no matter how fine, candles were dangerous. Falling asleep with a candle burning could be fatal. Fires in towns and castles often started this way. Stories survive of houses destroyed because someone forgot to snuff out a flame. So bedtime often included a ritual, servants carefully extinguishing candles one by one before their master lay down. The final darkness was both safe and unsettling. The symbol of light and darkness. Candles and fire were not just physical, they were symbolic. Light meant safety, holiness, and God's presence. Darkness meant danger, sin, and the devil's realm. This was why churches glowed with candles during night prayers, and why even poor families lit small lamps before holy images. To sleep in complete darkness felt unsafe to many. Even the faint glow of embers was comforting. Fire in towns and cities. For medieval towns, fire was the greatest threat. Wooden houses stood tightly packed, with thatched roofs like tinder. One house catching fire could mean a whole street gone. This is why towns employed night watchmen, to watch for flames. Bells rang if a fire was spotted, waking the whole town. Citizens would rush with buckets of water, forming chains to fight the blaze. So as people drifted into sleep, they did so with the awareness that the glow of fire, so necessary, could turn deadly in moments. Monasteries and the fire of prayer. In monasteries, fire had a different meaning. Monks rose through the night for prayers, and the chapel glowed with candles. The light symbolized eternal faith, keeping the darkness of sin away. For them, the flicker of flames was not only physical warmth, but spiritual strength. The night was a battle between light and dark, both in the world and in the soul. Stories and superstitions. Medieval people also attached superstitions to firelight. Some believed that letting a candle burn out on its own invited bad luck. Others thought that if a flame flickered strangely, it meant a spirit was near. Fire could also be used magically. Witches, it was said, lit candles in strange ways to summon demons. Conversely, holy candles blessed by priests were believed to ward off evil during the night. So fire was not just practical. It was a presence, one to be respected, feared, and watched carefully. Imagining the night glow. Now close your eyes and picture yourself in a medieval chamber. The bed is tall, with curtains drawn against the draught. A fire glows faintly in the hearth, crackling softly. Beside you, a beeswax candle burns low, its light golden on the walls. You feel safer in its glow, but you know you must not sleep until it is snuffed out. A servant enters quietly, cups the flame with an iron tool, and the room plunges into darkness. Only the faint warmth of embers remains. The night is now yours, quiet but shadowed. Or picture instead a peasant hut. The fire in the hearth has been banked with ashes. The family lies nearby on straw, comforted by the faint glow and heat. Outside, the wind rattles, but inside, the slow heartbeat of the fire keeps them safe. Closing thought. So in the Middle Ages, fire and candles were both guardians and threats. They gave light, warmth, and comfort, yet they could also bring ruin. To sleep beside them was to trust in their goodness while fearing their danger. And as you rest tonight, perhaps with a soft lamp nearby, remember those who once fell asleep to the crackle of fires and the flicker of candles, comforted and frightened all at once by the restless light of the medieval night. Pilgrims and sleep on the road tonight, as you settle safely into your own bed, imagine instead being far from home, walking long dusty roads and searching for a place to rest. In the Middle Ages, countless people did exactly that. Pilgrims walked to holy shrines, merchants carried goods between towns, soldiers marched for kings, wandering minstrels sang from city to city, and when night fell, they faced one of the hardest challenges: where to sleep. There were no hotels in the modern sense, no easy reservations. Instead, travelers depended on monasteries, inns, barns, and even the kindness of strangers. The road was full of danger, discomfort, and unexpected sleeping arrangements. Let us take a slow walk through that world of medieval travel and see how pilgrims and wanderers found rest in the dark. The Pilgrim's Journey. Pilgrimage was one of the great movements of the medieval world. People traveled to holy sites like Canterbury in England, Santiago de Compostela in Spain, or Rome itself. Some went to seek healing, some to give thanks, and some for the hope of spiritual forgiveness. A pilgrim often walked for weeks, carrying little more than a staff, a pouch, and maybe a blanket. At night, they slept where they could, sometimes under the open sky, sometimes in a barn, sometimes in the crowded hall of a monastery that welcomed travelers. The experience was exhausting, but also sacred. To sleep as a pilgrim was to surrender comfort, trusting in God's protection through the night. Monasteries as resting places. One of the safest havens for travelers was the monastery. Many religious houses had guest halls or hospices where pilgrims could stay. Here, travelers were given a simple bed, often straw-filled, sometimes shared with others, and a meal. The rules of Christian charity demanded that monasteries care for the poor and the wandering. For weary pilgrims, this was a blessing, a warm roof, food, and safety from robbers. But monasteries were not always comfortable. Guests rose early with the monks, sometimes disturbed at night by the bells calling brothers to midnight prayers. Still, For most pilgrims, a monastery bed was far better than the open road. Roadside inns and taverns. For merchants and wealthier travelers, inns were another option. These were often little more than wooden houses where strangers crowded together in large rooms. A bed might be shared by several people at once, with blankets thin and straw itchy. Animals were often kept inside the same building. A traveler might fall asleep to the snorts of horses, the bleating of goats, or the scratching of chickens. Inns were noisy, smoky, and not always safe. Thieves sometimes hid among the guests, waiting for opportunities. Taverns, too, sometimes offered beds, but at a cost, and with plenty of noise from drinkers late into the night. To sleep in a tavern was to accept the risk of stolen purses and loud neighbors. Sleeping in barns and fields. Many poor travelers could not afford inns at all. They begged shelter in barns, curled up in hay, or slept in fields by the roadside. Imagine lying down in the open, cloak pulled tight against the cold, stars bright above you. There was beauty, but also danger. Wolves, bandits, or simply the chill of the night. To sleep this way was to risk everything, yet thousands did it every year. The fear of the road at night. Traveling after dark was itself dangerous. Roads were rarely lit, and forests stretched endlessly between towns. Bandits lurked in the shadows, and even ordinary villagers could be suspicious of strangers. For this reason, travelers often moved in groups, sharing both the road and their sleeping spaces. Companionship was protection. To sleep with strangers by your side might not be comfortable, but it was safer than sleeping alone. Merchants and soldiers. Merchants carrying goods often hired guards, sleeping lightly while someone kept watch. Soldiers on campaign slept in camps, often on the ground or in rough tents. Fires burned through the night, and guards walked the perimeter to prevent surprise attacks. For both, sleep was less about rest and more about survival. To close your eyes was to trust others with your safety. The hardship of women travelers. For women, traveling and sleeping on the road was even harder. Female pilgrims often traveled in groups or with male relatives for protection. Inns and taverns could be dangerous places for women alone. Some convents opened their doors to female travelers, offering safer rest. But for many, the road at night was filled with fear. To find a secure sleeping place was as important as the journey itself. Imagining the journey now. Close your eyes and picture yourself as a pilgrim walking the road to Canterbury. Your feet are sore, your cloak heavy with dust. At last you find shelter in a small barn. You spread straw on the floor, lie down, and hear the soft breathing of others nearby. Outside, the wind whistles, but you are sheltered. Or imagine yourself as a merchant. You pay for a bed in a crowded inn. You squeeze into the straw mattress between two strangers. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of animals. You hold your purse close to your chest, drifting into uneasy sleep. Or perhaps you are a soldier in a field camp, lying near a fire, sword at your side. You fall asleep to the sound of guards pacing and the crackle of flames, half dreaming, half alert. For each traveler, sleep on the road was not comfort, it was endurance. Closing thought. So in the Middle Ages, to travel meant surrendering the comforts of home. Sleep was uncertain, fragile, and often shared with strangers, animals, or the cold earth itself. And yet for pilgrims, merchants, and wanderers, the hardship was part of the journey. To rest in strange places, under God's stars or in the company of strangers, was to be reminded that life itself was a pilgrimage. As you lie tonight in your own safe bed, think of those who once closed their eyes in barns, fields, and inns, trusting the road to carry them through the darkness to the dawn. Monks interrupted sleep. As you drift toward rest tonight, imagine a life where sleep is never whole, never continuous, but always broken by prayer. This was the life of a medieval monk. In monasteries across Europe, men and women devoted to God lived under strict rules that governed every hour of their day and night. Their lives were not shaped by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the ringing of bells that called them to prayer, even at the darkest hours. For monks, sleep was not just rest, it was a test of discipline, a rhythm of devotion, and a way to show that their lives belonged not to comfort, but to God. The rule of Saint Benedict. Much of monastic life in the Middle Ages was shaped by the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century. This guide for monastic living became the foundation for many communities. According to this rule, the day was divided into hours of prayer, work, and study. These prayers, called the Divine Office, were not just during the day but also deep in the night. The most important of these night prayers was called matins, later sometimes joined with lauds. Bells rang at midnight or in the very early hours before dawn. Sleepers rose from their cots, wrapped their robes around them, and walked into the cold, dark church to chant psalms. The night bell. Imagine lying on a simple straw mattress in a monastery dormitory. The room is long and bare, filled with rows of low beds. The air is cold. Suddenly the bell rings. The sound cuts through your sleep, steady and commanding. You rise immediately. There is no lingering, no snooze button. In silence, you pull on your habit and file out with your brothers or sisters. The stone floor is cold beneath your feet. The church is dark, lit only by a few flickering candles. Together you begin to chant, slow, steady voices rising into the night. This was the rhythm of monastic sleep, broken, disciplined, but holy. Why break sleep? Why such interruption? For monks, the answer was simple: to give the night to God. The hours of darkness were seen as dangerous, full of demons and temptations. By praying at midnight, monks claimed the night as holy. They rose to keep watch, as Christ had told his disciples. It was also a way of humbling the body. Comfort was seen as a temptation. By breaking their sleep, monks showed their willingness to sacrifice earthly rest for heavenly devotion. The pattern of monastic sleep. A typical monk's night might look like this. Sleep begins after the last prayers of the evening, often around 7:30 or 8. Around midnight the bell rings for matins. The monks wake, pray, chant, and sometimes read until about 2 They return to their beds for a few hours of second sleep. At dawn, the bell rings again for lauds, the morning prayer, beginning the new day. In some stricter orders, sleep was divided even more, with multiple interruptions throughout the night. Monks grew used to short bursts of rest rather than one long stretch. The physical strain. This broken rhythm was not easy. Monks often struggled with exhaustion, especially in winter when nights were long. Manuscripts contain notes from monks who admitted to dozing off during prayers, their heads nodding mid-chant. Some monasteries tried to help by allowing naps during the day, but strict orders like the Cistercians demanded severe discipline. Sleep was treated not as a right, but as something to be rationed carefully, never indulged. The spiritual meaning of interrupted sleep. To modern ears, this may sound harsh, but for monks, the broken night was full of meaning. Each interruption was a reminder that life was not about personal comfort. Rising in darkness to sing psalms was an offering to God. In fact, many monks described the night prayers as the most beautiful part of their day. The stillness of the world, the glow of candles, the haunting sound of voices in harmony. It was, for them, a taste of heaven on earth. Differences among orders. Not every monastery kept the exact same schedule. Benedictines, Cluniacs, Cistercians, Carthusians, each had its own rules. Some allowed longer stretches of sleep, others demanded more waking hours in prayer. The Carthusians, one of the strictest orders, lived largely in silence and solitude. Their nights were particularly austere, with long vigils that left little time for rest. For them, the broken sleep was not just discipline, but a way of imitating Christ's suffering. Lay brothers and sisters. It was not only choir monks and nuns who followed these rhythms. Lay brothers and sisters, those who worked more with their hands in fields or kitchens, also rose at night, though sometimes with lighter duties. For them, the broken sleep was balanced by the heavy labor of the day. Still, The expectation was the same. No one in the monastery lived for their own comfort. Every breath, every hour, every dream was for God. Imagining the monastic night. Close your eyes now and picture the monastery at midnight. The world outside is dark, silent except for wind and owls. Inside, the bell tolls. One by one, monks rise from their narrow beds, silent shadows in the corridor. They enter the church. The air smells of stone, wax, and smoke. A single candle flickers, throwing long shadows. The chanting begins, low, steady, timeless. Latin words fill the space, carrying into heaven. After an hour, the monks return to their beds, slipping back into short, light sleep before dawn calls them again. This was their rhythm, their offering, their nightly sacrifice. Closing thought. So while peasants and nobles struggled with the ordinary discomforts of sleep, straw, fleas, cold, monks faced a different challenge, the surrender of sleep itself. For them, the night was never theirs. It belonged to God. Their broken sleep was not a burden, but a devotion, a way of shaping every moment of life into prayer. As you close your eyes tonight, think of those who, centuries ago, woke in the darkest hours to sing in candlelit churches, keeping watch through the night while the world around them dreamed. The silent night markets. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often picture life shutting down at sunset. Peasants asleep on straw, towns dark and quiet, only watchmen walking the streets. But the truth is more complicated. Some towns never fully slept. In the darkness, bakers lit their ovens, brewers stirred their vats, and merchants set up stalls to sell food and drink before dawn. This gave rise to what we might call night markets. Quiet, practical gatherings where people worked, bought, and traded in the hours before most of the town woke. So tonight, let us wander slowly through those silent medieval markets, where the smell of bread and ale mixed with the stillness of the night. The work of baker's bread was the foundation of medieval diets. Almost every meal, rich or poor, included it. But to have fresh loaves ready by morning, bakers had to rise while others still slept. Imagine a baker in London or Paris around the year 1400. In the middle of the night, he stokes his oven, kneading dough by the light of a candle. Apprentices carry flour, pound it into the dough, and shape it into loaves. By dawn, the ovens roar with heat, and baskets of steaming bread are ready for sale. This meant that before most people rose, the streets already smelled of warm bread. Townspeople passing by on their way to early prayers or work might stop to buy a loaf straight from the oven. Brewers and alewives, beer and ale were as essential as bread. In fact, for many, ale was safer to drink than water. Like bakers, brewers worked late at night. Large vats of grain mash had to be stirred, boiled, and cooled. Often it was women, called alewives, who brewed and sold the drink. They sometimes opened their doors in the dark hours to sell mugs of ale to night workers, watchmen, or early risers heading to fields and workshops. So while most of the town slept, small groups gathered quietly in alehouses, sipping warm drink in the flicker of firelight. Fishmongers and meat sellers. Some markets also had vendors arriving before dawn with fish, meat, or produce. Fishermen returned from rivers or seas during the night and needed to sell their catch fresh. Farmers traveling into town brought eggs, milk, or vegetables early before the day's heat spoiled them. By first light, the market square might already be alive with quiet trade. Stalls being set up, carts arriving, buyers haggling softly. Why night markets? Existed, night markets were not entertainment. They were necessity. Townspeople needed bread for the day, ale for work, and food for markets before shops opened. Workers needed to eat before heading into the fields, mills, or workshops at sunrise. So the hours between midnight and dawn became the hidden heartbeat of the town, when bakers, brewers, and early merchants kept life moving, even as most people dreamed. The silent nature of the market. Unlike the noisy markets of daytime, these night markets were often quiet. People spoke softly, avoiding the wrath of neighbors who still slept. Candles or torches lit the stalls dimly, casting long shadows. The noise of carts and animals was hushed compared to the bustle of midday. For those awake, the night market felt secret, almost magical. A small world apart from the crowded, chaotic daytime trade. Curfews and control. In many towns, however, night markets were controversial. The curfew bell signaled that fires should be covered and people indoors. Authorities worried that too much night activity invited theft, fights, or fire. Yet bakers and brewers were often allowed exceptions. Without them, towns would wake to no bread, no ale, no food. So, even under curfew, certain workers were trusted to move quietly through the night. Travelers and night purchases. For travelers arriving late to a town, the night market was a blessing. Hungry pilgrims or merchants could buy bread or drink before resting. Soldiers on campaign might march at odd hours and stop at night stalls for supplies. So while the market was primarily for townsfolk, it also served the flow of people passing through, reminding us that medieval towns were not as still as we often imagine. The smell of the night market. To picture it fully, close your eyes. The street is dark, lit by a few torches. A baker pulls steaming loaves from the oven. The smell of fresh bread mixes with the yeasty tang of ale being poured in wooden mugs. A fishmonger unloads baskets glistening with river catch. A farmer lays out eggs in straw-lined crates. The night air is cold, but the market is alive with warmth, smell, and quiet activity. You take a warm loaf in your hands, the steam rising against the chill. It feels like life itself, prepared while most of the town slept. The people behind it. For bakers, brewers, and vendors, the night market meant little sleep. Their lives ran opposite to others. They worked when townspeople dreamed, and finally rested when the streets were full of daylight. This rhythm was exhausting, but it made them vital to their communities. A town without its night workers would wake hungry. In a way, they were the unseen guardians of daily life, laboring in the shadows so that others could begin the day. Closing thought. So while the image of the sleeping medieval town is partly true, another picture exists beneath it. Small fires glowing in bakeries, women stirring brewing pots, fishmongers unloading baskets, farmers setting up stalls. The night was not empty. It was alive with quiet trade, the soft hum of work, the smell of bread and ale. And as you drift towards sleep tonight, remember that centuries ago, while others rested, there were always hands kneading, stirring, and trading in the shadows, keeping the town alive through the silent hours before dawn. Medical beliefs about sleep. As you rest tonight, perhaps thinking of sleep as a natural, automatic process, imagine instead living in the Middle Ages, when sleep was not simply closing your eyes. It was something doctors, priests, and scholars debated. For medieval people, sleep was tied to health, digestion, balance, and even morality. Too much of it was seen as laziness, too little as dangerous. Doctors gave long advice on how to sleep, when to sleep, even which side of the body to lie on. Tonight, let us wander through this world of medieval medical sleep beliefs, where every dream, every nap, every position carried meaning. The four humors and sleep medieval medicine followed the ancient theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, it was believed, came from keeping these fluids in balance. Sleep, according to this model, happened when the body's natural heat retreated inward, allowing the brain to cool. If the humors were unbalanced, sleep was disturbed. A fever caused restless nights. Excess phlegm caused heavy, dull slumber. Too much black bile brought nightmares. So, for medieval doctors, sleep was a window into the state of the body. To ask about a patient's dreams or sleeping habits was as important as checking their pulse. The right amount of sleep. How much should one sleep? Medieval writers often recommended 7 to 8 hours, surprisingly similar to what we say today. But they warned against oversleeping, which was considered unhealthy and even sinful. Too much sleep was said to cause sluggishness, weakened digestion, and an increase in phlegm. It was also linked to the deadly sin of sloth. A lazy person who lingered in bed was not only harming their body, but endangering their soul. On the other hand, too little sleep could weaken the mind, bring on fevers, or cause madness. Balance was everything. The best time to sleep doctors advised that the best time to sleep was between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. Sleeping in the middle of the day was discouraged, though short naps were sometimes accepted. Sleeping at sunset was believed to cause indigestion, since food eaten at supper had not yet digested. Sleeping too late in the morning was thought to make the body heavy and the mind dull. The hours just after midnight were considered the healthiest for rest. Which side to sleep on? Perhaps the strangest advice concerned sleeping positions. Doctors gave very specific instructions. First, lie on your right side after supper to allow the stomach to digest properly. Then, after some hours, turn to your left side, so the liver could distribute the digested food evenly. Avoid lying on the stomach, which was considered harmful. Lying on the back was discouraged, since it was thought to cause bad dreams, suffocation, or even invite demons to attack. In short, medieval sleep came with careful choreography. Right side first, then left, with turning at the proper times. Food, drink, and dreams diet was believed to shape sleep. Heavy suppers caused nightmares. Spicy foods created restless tossing. Too much wine made for heavy, unhealthy slumber. Doctors even linked specific dreams to meals. To dream of fire meant your body was too hot. To dream of floods meant too much phlegm. Dreams were, in this way, medical diagnoses as much as mysteries of the soul. Seasonal sleep doctors also advised different patterns for different seasons. In winter, longer sleep was permitted since the cold drained strength. In summer, shorter sleep was healthier, as too much rest in the heat was said to weaken the body. The balance of nature, seasons, and humors all tied into how a person should rest. The dangers of night air. Another common belief was that the night air itself was dangerous. Doctors warned against leaving windows open, fearing bad vapors that could seep into the body during sleep. This was especially important during times of plague, when night air was thought to carry disease. People shut their shutters tight, even in summer, believing that a draft could bring death. Astrology and sleep. For some, sleep advice even reached the stars. Astrology played a role in medieval medicine, and certain times of night were considered more favorable for rest, depending on the movements of the planets. Some doctors suggested that dreams at particular hours were more truthful than others. For example, dreams just before dawn were thought to carry more meaning than dreams earlier in the night. The role of prayer. Alongside medical advice, spiritual rules also shaped sleep. People were told to pray before bed, not only to protect against demons, but also to calm the mind. Anger, lust, or worry before sleep was said to poison the humors and bring nightmares. Thus, a pure soul and a clean conscience were seen as important for restful sleep. Imagining a patient's advice. Now imagine a medieval doctor giving you advice for sleep. Eat a light supper. Do not drink too much ale. At night, lie first on your right side, then after some hours turn to your left. Do not sleep flat on your back, lest evil spirits trouble you. Rise with the dawn, for oversleeping corrupts both body and soul. And above all, say your prayers, for only God grants peaceful dreams. For them, this was not superstition. It was careful science, drawn from centuries of tradition. Closing thought. So while we today measure sleep in minutes, steps, and cycles, medieval people measured it in humors, prayers, and virtues. Sleep was never just physical. It was moral, spiritual, and deeply tied to health. As you lie down tonight, perhaps you will remember their advice. Right side first, then left. Not too much food, not too much drink, and always a prayer before sleep. Perhaps in following their rhythm, you too might dream as they once did, of balance, of health, and of a night guarded by God. Beds as social status. As you sink into your own bed tonight, consider this. In the Middle Ages, your bed would have revealed everything about you. It told the world who you were, how much you owned, and where you stood in society. For peasants, a bed was straw on the ground. For merchants, a wooden frame with wool or linen. For nobles, a towering structure of carved wood, silks, and curtains, a throne of sleep. Beds were not just for resting, they were for showing off, for receiving guests, and even for marking life's great ceremonies, birth, marriage, and death. Tonight, let us step softly into that world where beds define status as much as clothing, castles, or titles. The peasant's bed, hidden and humble. In a poor household, the bed was nothing special. Often it was a simple pallet of straw, reeds, or hay on the floor. Sometimes it was stuffed into a sack, what we would call a mattress. Families shared this space, parents, children, and sometimes even animals. Privacy did not exist. The bed was not decorated, not displayed, not admired. It was simply a place to collapse after long work. In many cases, it was so rough that bedding was repurposed for livestock once it became too old for human use. To visit a peasant's home was to barely notice the bed at all. It was hidden in the shadows, nothing worth mentioning. The merchant's bed, respectable comfort. For townsfolk with more wealth, merchants, guildmasters, or skilled craftsmen, the bed became something more. These families often had wooden bed frames raised off the ground. The mattress might be stuffed with wool or feathers, covered with linen sheets and blankets. Curtains could be hung, not for display, but to keep out drafts. These beds were not luxurious, but they were respectable. A merchant's bed showed that he was successful, able to afford more than straw. Visitors might even glimpse it if invited into the household. It was a quiet signal of rising status. The noble's bed, a throne of sleep. For nobles and royalty, however, the bed was a stage, a symbol, and a treasure. Beds were among the most valuable possessions in a noble household. They were made of carved oak or walnut, sometimes inlaid with ivory or decorated with gilding. The posts reached high, supporting heavy curtains of velvet or silk. These curtains served a purpose. They kept out the cold, but they also displayed wealth. Fabrics were dyed in rich colors like crimson, blue, or gold. Embroidery glittered in the candlelight. The mattress was filled with feathers, layered with fine linen, wool blankets, and silk covers. Servants prepared it carefully, sometimes even warming it with hot stones before their master entered. But most striking of all, the bed was not hidden. It was on display. The bed is public space. In noble and royal culture, the bed was more than a private object. It was a stage for ceremony. Guests were sometimes received in the bedchamber. Important visitors might sit on the bed as a sign of honor. Royalty often gave audiences from bed, reclining against pillows while petitioners spoke. Births took place in beds, with family and attendants gathered around. Deaths, too, were public. Nobles died in their beds, surrounded by witnesses, their passing a kind of performance. Even marriages were displayed through the bed. The bedding ceremony was a common ritual in which a newlywed couple was escorted to bed by their families, sometimes even with prayers or blessings said aloud. The bed in these moments was not private, it was a public stage. Portable beds. Noble beds were so valuable that they were often portable. Kings and lords traveling to war or moving between castles brought their beds with them, disassembled and carried by servants. Imagine an army camp where the king's tent contained not just a cot, but an entire feather bed, curtained and decorated, standing like a throne in the middle of a field. Even in war, the bed symbolized rank. Inheritance and wealth beds were considered so precious that they were listed in wills. A noble might leave a bed and its hangings to a child or relative as part of inheritance. Sometimes the fabrics around the bed, embroidered sheets, velvet curtains, were more valuable than the wooden frame itself. Owning such a bed was a clear sign of wealth. Religious and moral views. The church sometimes criticized the luxury of noble beds, warning against vanity and excess. To spend fortunes on silk and embroidery while peasants slept on straw was seen as wasteful and sinful. Yet the display of a grand bed continued because it was not just luxury, it was power. To be seen reclining in such splendor was to show one's place in the social order. The symbol of height. One detail was especially symbolic. Noble beds were tall. Steps were sometimes needed to climb in. This height separated the noble sleeper from the cold earth, but also from the world of peasants below. To lie high above, surrounded by curtains of silk, was to live in a different world entirely. Imagining the contrast now, imagine yourself as a peasant, lying on straw in a smoky hut, fleas biting, children pressed against you. Then imagine instead being a noble, climbing steps into a towering feather bed, curtains closing, warmth and fragrance surrounding you. The contrast was as sharp as night and day. A bed was not just a place to rest, it was a mirror of society itself. Closing thought. So in the Middle Ages, the bed was more than furniture. It was a measure of wealth, a stage for ceremony, a symbol of power. To lie down each night was not the same for all. It was hardship for some, splendor for others. As you lie in your own bed tonight, think of those long ago whose sleep was written in straw or feathers or velvet. For them, the bed itself was history, a story of class, comfort, and the great ladder of medieval life, sleeping during plague times. As you lie safely tonight, think of a time when even the act of sleep carried fear. In the Middle Ages, plague struck suddenly and terribly. None more feared than the Black Death of the 14th century. Villages emptied, towns fell silent, and families prayed desperately for survival. In those dark times, even sleep was uncertain. People feared the night air, believed sickness crept in while they slept, and changed their habits to guard themselves from invisible danger. Let us step quietly into that fearful world and see how plague altered the way medieval people rested. The Black Death arrives. The year is 1347. Ships arrive in European ports carrying rats, fleas, and the terrible sickness that would kill millions. People saw neighbors fall ill in hours, a cough, a swelling, a fever, then death. The panic was immense. Families locked themselves inside, streets were silent, and in this silence, night became a time of deep anxiety. Sleep no longer felt safe, it felt like surrender. Fear of night air. One of the strongest medieval beliefs was in miasma, the idea that disease spread through bad air. At night, when the air grew colder and damper, people believed these deadly vapors were most dangerous, so windows were closed tightly. Fires were kept burning to purify the air. Some people slept with herbs or flowers near their beds, believing sweet smells could ward off sickness. A sprig of rosemary, a bunch of lavender, or even a vinegar-soaked cloth might be laid beside the sleeper's head. But even so, the fear lingered. What if the air itself brought death as you dreamed? Changes in sleeping spaces. Houses changed their sleeping habits during plague times. Families who once slept crowded together sometimes tried to spread apart, fearing contagion. In cities, the wealthy fled to the countryside where they believed the air was cleaner. Nobles retreated to manor houses. Merchants shut their shops and locked their doors. Beds in the city were abandoned. Entire houses stood empty. For the poor who could not escape, sleep became something fragile and fearful, taken wherever safety seemed possible. Doctors' advice about sleep. Medieval physicians gave long lists of advice during plagues, and many focused on sleep. They warned against sleeping too much, saying it made the body weak. They also warned against sleeping too little, saying it left the body unprotected. Balance, as always, was the rule. Doctors advised, sleep in well-ventilated rooms, though with shutters closed at night. Avoid sleeping after heavy meals, which weakened the humors. Rest lightly, so the body was alert to signs of sickness. Some even suggested sleeping with certain amulets or charms under the pillow, gems, written prayers, or bits of metal said to repel disease. The sickbed. During plague. For those who did fall ill, the bed became the center of everything. A plague victim was often confined to their bed, sweating, shivering, and coughing. Families gathered around, praying or weeping. Priests brought last rites to the bedside. Beds were also feared, however, because they became places of death. The sight of a neighbor carried out on their mattress was common. In some places, beds and bedding of plague victims were burned to stop the spread. So while sleep was necessary, it was also terrifying. To lie down sick was to wonder if you would ever rise again. Night watches and the dying families often kept night watches over the sick. Instead of sleeping, relatives or neighbors sat awake, watching for signs of death or change. Candles burned through the night, shadows flickered, prayers were whispered. For these watchers, sleep was abandoned. The night became a vigil, a battle against despair. The rhythm of first sleep and second sleep was replaced by anxious wakefulness, as fear of plague overcame all ordinary habits. The wealthy and their sleep. Wealthier families had better chances of comfort. They fled cities for the countryside, slept in large, airy rooms, and used perfumed pillows stuffed with herbs. They believed these luxuries protected them. But wealth did not guarantee safety. Chronicles tell of nobles and even kings who died in their grand beds, proving that no curtain or feather mattress could keep the plague out. The poor and their sleep. For peasants, the plague was merciless. Families often slept in the same one-room huts, making contagion inevitable. One fell ill, then all. Some villagers abandoned sick relatives, leaving them in their beds to die alone, too afraid to stay near them. Others stayed together, sleeping side by side in love and defiance, even knowing it meant death. The psychological weight of sleep. Perhaps the most haunting part of plague sleep was psychological. People feared that if they lay down, they might not wake again. The line between ordinary sleep and the sleep of death felt thin. Priests reminded the faithful to pray before bed, to confess sins, to make peace, because each night could be their last. Sleep became both necessary and dangerous, both rest and surrender. Imagining a plague night. Now, close your eyes and picture a plague-struck town. The streets are empty, bells toll for the dead. Inside a small house, a family huddles in one room. The air smells of herbs and smoke. A child coughs in the corner bed. The parents lie awake, not daring to sleep. Every creak of the floor, every ragged breath, feels heavy with dread. They whisper prayers. The candle burns low. At last, exhaustion overtakes them, and they drift into uneasy dreams. Dreams filled with shadows of death, broken by sudden wakings. Sleep, once a comfort, has become another kind of fear. Closing thought. So in the Middle Ages, when plague swept across the land, sleep itself changed. It was no longer a time of peace, but of worry. Families closed their shutters, burned herbs, and prayed each night that they might wake again. As you lie safe tonight, remember those who lived in that age of fear, where every night's rest carried the question, would dawn bring life or silence? Sleeping during war's castles. As you lie peacefully tonight, think of a time when sleep was not safe. In the Middle Ages, wars, raids, and sieges were common. Soldiers marched for kings, castles prepared for attack, and villages feared the sound of horns at night. In such a world, even the simple act of closing your eyes could feel risky. Let us walk slowly through that world and see how people tried to sleep. Soldiers in camps, lords in castles, peasants in villages, always with one ear open for danger. Soldiers in camps. On campaign, soldiers rarely enjoyed real comfort. Instead of beds, they slept on the ground, in fields or forests, wrapped in cloaks. Some slept in simple tents, others curled up by fires under the open sky. The sound of night in a camp was a mix of crackling flames, the stamping of horses, and the distant mutter of men. Guards, called sentries, kept watch around the perimeter. Soldiers knew that raids were common at night. A surprise attack could scatter an army before dawn. So sleep was light, restless, broken by noise and the fear of danger. Many soldiers kept weapons close, swords, spears, or bows within reach. Even in dreams they were half alert. The castle at nightlife. In a castle gave more protection, but it too was shaped by fear of attack. Castles were designed not only for defense during the day, but also for watch through the night. Guards stood on walls, torches lit towers, and the great gate was barred. Families inside might rest more securely than villagers outside, but they were never entirely free of worry. Nobles slept in tall curtained beds, surrounded by servants. Yet even their chambers were part of defense. Windows were small and narrow, doors thick and barred. A noble might fall asleep to the sound of guards' footsteps echoing in the courtyard below. Villages. During war for peasants, war was even more frightening. Villages had no stone walls or towers. When raiders came, they burned cottages, stole animals, and carried off supplies. During times of conflict, peasants sometimes slept fully dressed, ready to run. Families hid valuables in the ground or under floors before bed. Some fled to forests or fields, sleeping outside to avoid soldiers passing through. In border regions, the fear was constant. To sleep in a village near battle was to live with one eye open, knowing the night could bring fire and steel. Sieges and sleep. The most dramatic example of sleep under war came during sieges. Imagine being inside a castle surrounded by enemy forces. The gates are closed, supplies rationed, and the days long with tension. At night, the defenders try to rest, but the enemy outside is awake. Arrows may fly into the walls. Fires might be set against gates. Tunnels may be dug underground. The defenders sleep in armor or near weapons, ready to rush to the walls if the alarm sounds. Children, servants, and nobles alike rest uneasily, the silence broken by sudden shouts or horns. For those outside the walls, sleep was no easier. Soldiers camped in mud, exposed to weather, lying down in armor or on thin blankets. Fires burned through the night, but many had to stay awake, guarding against surprise attacks. Knights and campaigns. Even knights, with their wealth and rank, suffered on campaign. Chronicles describe them sleeping in armor during dangerous nights, lying on cloaks with only saddles for pillows. Horses were tied nearby, always ready for quick escape. Knights were trained to endure discomfort, but even so, the lack of rest made battles more brutal. Exhausted men fought with heavy arms after sleepless nights, turning warfare into a test of stamina as much as skill. The sounds of war at night. To truly imagine medieval sleep during war, think of the sounds. In villages, dogs barking, horns blowing, fires crackling, distant shouts. In camps, the creak of armor, neighing horses, the pacing of guards. In castles, the toll of bells warning of attack, the steady footsteps of sentries on the walls. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the knowledge that danger never slept. Religion and night watch. For many, prayer was the only comfort. Soldiers carried crosses or charms, whispering prayers before lying down. Nobles in castles sometimes held vigils, asking for God's protection. Even guards on night watch prayed as they paced the walls, believing that their duty was not only to protect the body, but also the soul of the community. Imagining the scene now, close your eyes and picture it. You are a soldier, lying in a field camp. The ground is cold beneath you. The fire burns low. Around you men snore uneasily, hands on weapons. Somewhere in the dark, a sentry calls out, his voice trembling in the silence. You drift into shallow dreams, knowing an attack could come at any moment. Or you are a noble in a castle. You lie in a tall feather bed, curtains drawn, a servant nearby. Yet you too hear the sounds of guards outside, the ring of metal on stone. You sleep more safely than peasants, but you too know that war is close. Or you are a villager huddled with family in a barn. You clutch your children close, praying the soldiers will pass by. You do not sleep deeply. You cannot. The fear is too near. Closing thought. So in the Middle Ages, war shaped even the most private act of life, sleep. For soldiers, it meant exhaustion and danger. For nobles, it meant guarded comfort. For peasants, it meant fear and flight. As you rest tonight, safe from such fears, remember those who closed their eyes in castles, camps, and cottages, never certain if dawn would bring peace or the thunder of war. Children's sleep rituals. As you lie comfortably tonight, imagine being a child in the Middle Ages, drifting into sleep not with a soft lamp and bedtime story, but in a smoky room, surrounded by siblings, animals, and the fears of the dark. Parents loved their children deeply, yet they also lived in a world of high infant mortality, strong faith, and constant danger. To them, a child's sleep was never simple. It was fragile, precious, and in need of protection from spirits, sickness, and sudden death. Let us step gently into that world and see how medieval families guarded their children's sleep, with lullabies, prayers, charms, and rituals. The shared bed. Children rarely had their own rooms or even their own beds. Instead, they slept beside parents or siblings on straw pallets or wooden frames. In peasant cottages, the whole family might huddle together under a single blanket, children pressed against their mother or curled near the hearth. In noble houses, children sometimes slept in adjoining chambers or on smaller beds near their parents' large curtained bed. The closeness was practical. It gave warmth in drafty houses and allowed parents to watch over children during the night. Bedtime prayers. One of the most important rituals was prayer. Parents taught children to recite short prayers before sleep, asking God, the Virgin Mary, or guardian angels to protect them through the night. A common prayer was much like the later rhyme, "If I should die before I wake." Medieval people truly feared that children might not wake, so the bedtime prayer was both comforting and solemn. Priests encouraged families to make the sign of the cross over their children before bed, marking them as safe from demons or witches. Lullabies and songs. Mothers often sang lullabies, soft, repetitive songs that soothed children into rest. Some were gentle and tender, while others contained warnings, reminding children to behave or invoking saints for protection. For example, some lullabies included lines about the Virgin Mary watching over the cradle or angels keeping guard at night. Others carried a darker tone, warning that if the child cried too much, spirits might come. These lullabies reveal both love and fear, the tenderness of parents mixed with the ever-present sense of danger. Cradles and protection. Babies often slept in wooden cradles, rocked gently by mothers or older siblings, but the cradle was not left unguarded. Charms were hung above it, sprigs of herbs like rosemary or juniper, believed to ward off evil. Small crosses or holy medals were tied to the cradle. In some places, even knives were placed nearby, not to harm, but to frighten away witches or spirits. Folk belief warned that fairies or demons might steal babies at night, replacing them with changelings. To prevent this, parents kept constant watch during infancy, and sleep itself became a guarded act. Children's night. Fears like children today, medieval children feared the dark. But in their world, those fears were fed by real dangers. Parents warned of witches, spirits, or wild animals. Shadows from the fire, the sound of owls, or the howl of dogs were all reminders of unseen threats. To soothe children, parents told stories of saints and angels. To frighten them into obedience, they sometimes spoke of spirits who punished naughty children at night. Sleep was thus surrounded by stories, some gentle, some fearful. Illness in the night was also when sickness often struck hardest. Children with fevers, coughs, or chills worried parents deeply. Many believed that demons or bad air attacked children in their sleep. Mothers sometimes stayed awake, watching by candlelight, whispering prayers. Remedies were placed in cradles, amulets, written charms, even bits of bread or salt meant to guard the child's spirit. In noble families, nurses or servants kept watch through the night, rocking infants or soothing them while parents rested. Seasonal rhythms. Children's sleep, like adults, followed the seasons. In winter, nights were long and children slept early, often before the fire. In summer, when daylight lingered, they stayed awake later, sometimes falling asleep outside in the warmth, carried in later by parents. The rhythm of sleep was less strict than today. Children napped during the day, dozed at the hearth, and often woke at night during the period of first sleep and second sleep. Parents accepted these rhythms as natural. Noble children and tutors. In noble households, children's sleep was treated with more ceremony. Tutors and nurses ensured prayers were said, charms placed, and beds prepared with clean linen. Curtains around the child's bed gave both warmth and privacy. Even here, though, fear remained. Chroniclers describe noble children dying suddenly in their sleep, leading parents to call for masses, candles, and more protective rituals. No rank was safe from the fragility of childhood rest. Imagining the scene. Now, picture a medieval night. A mother rocks a cradle by the fire, singing softly, her voice mingling with the crackle of wood. A sprig of herbs hangs above, a charm against evil. A child murmurs a prayer, crossing themselves before curling beside their siblings. The father whispers a blessing, the room darkens, shadows stretch across the rafters. The family sleeps together, but the parents wake often, listening for the baby's breath, watching the embers, whispering prayers in the silence. It is love, it is fear, it is ritual. This was childhood sleep in the Middle Ages. Closing thought. So for medieval families, a child's sleep was never taken for granted. It was wrapped in prayers, guarded by charms, soothed by lullabies, and watched with anxious eyes. As you lie safely tonight, think of those centuries ago who whispered blessings over their children, hoping each night that dawn would bring health, safety, and the simple gift of another day. Weather and seasonal sleep. As you lie in bed tonight, perhaps with steady electric light and a thermostat keeping your room the same all year round, think instead of a medieval house. No electricity, no glass windows for most families, only fire for warmth, shutters for darkness, and blankets of wool or fur. In such a world, sleep followed the rhythm of the seasons. Long, cold winters meant long nights of rest, while summer brought short sleep and long days of labor. Storms, winds, heat, and cold, all shaped when people lay down, how deeply they rested, and how safe they felt at night. Let us move slowly through the medieval year and see how weather ruled the rhythms of sleep. Winter, the season of long nights. In winter, nights stretched endlessly. Sunset came early, sometimes before supper, and dawn arrived late. Peasants often went to bed soon after dark, not out of choice, but because candles were costly and firewood precious. This meant that people often spent 12-14 hours in bed during the coldest months. But this was not continuous sleep. Instead, winter encouraged the pattern of first sleep and second sleep. People slept deeply for several hours, woke in the middle of the night to tend the fire, pray or talk, and then drifted back for another long stretch. Winter also brought physical challenges. Beds were cold, blankets thin, and cottages drafty. Families slept close together, with children pressed against parents, animals nearby for warmth, and everyone bundled under wool and fur. To sleep in winter was to fight against the cold, making the bed not just a place of rest, but a shield against freezing nights. Summer, short nights, long days. Summer was the opposite. Days were long, work was heavy, and nights were short. Farmers often rose before dawn to take advantage of the cool morning hours for labor in fields. Sleep was shorter, sometimes only 6 to 7 hours, broken into segments. Afternoon naps became more common, especially during the hottest months, when the midday sun made field work unbearable. But summer nights brought their own troubles. With windows open for air, insects entered. Straw mattresses grew warm and itchy. In crowded towns, the heat of fires and bodies made sleep difficult. So while winter brought long, cold nights, summer brought short, restless ones. Spring and autumn, seasons of transition. Spring and autumn were seasons of change. Spring brought relief from winter's long confinement, but also heavy work, planting, lambing, and preparing fields. Sleep was lighter, as chores stretched from dawn to dusk. Autumn brought harvest, often requiring work well into the night. Villages sometimes stayed awake late by firelight, gathering crops before the rains came. Sleep was sacrificed to ensure survival through the winter. These transitional seasons showed how flexible medieval sleep was, never fixed, always shifting with labor and survival needs. Religious views of seasonal sleep. The church, too, shaped how people thought of seasonal rhythms. Priests reminded villagers that long nights in winter were opportunities for prayer, while short summer sleep was part of God's design for work and labor. Monks adjusted their prayer schedules with the seasons, rising earlier in summer and later in winter. Their strict routines reflected how even religious life bent to the natural cycle of the year, wealth and seasonal comfort. As with most things, wealth made a difference. Nobles in castles had feather beds, thick curtains, and servants to tend fires through the night. They endured storms more comfortably, though even they sometimes suffered smoke, drafts, and cold. Peasants, meanwhile, felt every change of season directly. Their beds grew damp in rainy weather, their straw moldy or frozen. Winter meant aching cold, summer meant stifling heat. For them, sleep was never separate from weather, it was shaped by it. Imagining the year of sleep now, close your eyes and imagine yourself as a medieval villager. In winter, you lie down at dusk, wrapped in rough blankets, the room filled with family and animals. The night is long, the fire dim, and you wake in the middle hours to stoke the coals. Then you drift back until dawn. In summer, you rise before the sun, sweat already on your brow. You sleep only briefly at night, sometimes napping under trees during the day. The night is filled with insects, neighbors' voices, and the restless air. In spring and autumn, your sleep is broken by labor, planting, harvesting, storing food. You rise and sleep not when you want to, but when the land demands. Closing thought. So while we today measure sleep by the clock, medieval people measured it by the sun, the seasons, and the weather. Sleep was long in winter, short in summer, restless in storms, and shaped always by the natural world around them. As you rest tonight in a room safe from wind and rain, think of those who once lay under straw roofs, listening to storms, rising with the sun, and sleeping in rhythm with the turning of the year. From medieval sleep to modern beds. As you lie in your bed tonight, with electric light at your fingertips, glass windows shielding you from the weather, and perhaps a clock glowing softly nearby, it may feel natural to imagine that sleep has always been this way. One long stretch in a private bed, soft pillows and warm blankets. But as we have seen throughout this journey, sleep in the Middle Ages was very different. It was crowded, broken into first sleep and second sleep, full of fears of demons and fires, shaped by weather, prayer, and poverty. So how did the world move from medieval sleep to the modern bed? Tonight, let us take one final step through time, watching how centuries of change reshape the way humans close their eyes. The disappearance of two sleeps. One of the greatest shifts was the loss of segmented sleep. For centuries, people expected to wake in the middle of the night. The pause between first sleep and second sleep was used for prayer, chores, or quiet talk. But as towns grew and artificial light became common, first candles, then oil lamps, then gas and electric lamps, people stayed awake later. They no longer went to bed at sunset, so their nights were shorter. The midnight pause slowly faded, replaced by one long block of rest. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the idea of two sleeps was nearly forgotten. People came to see waking at night as a problem, not a normal rhythm. Modern medicine even labeled it insomnia, the rise of private bedrooms. In the medieval world, most peasants slept together in one room. Inns forced strangers into the same beds. Even nobles received guests in their bedchambers. Sleep was communal, not private. Over time, houses grew larger, and privacy became a sign of refinement. By the 17th and 18th centuries, wealthy families had separate bedrooms. By the 19th century, even middle-class homes began to give children their own rooms. To sleep alone in a private space became the new standard. What once seemed strange, solitary sleep, became a mark of dignity and comfort. The transformation of beds themselves also changed. For peasants, straw pallets slowly gave way to better materials: wool, feathers, cotton. For nobles, the towering curtain-draped beds of the Middle Ages became less common. By the 18th century, beds were simpler, lower, and easier to clean. By the 19th and 20th centuries, industrial production created mattresses with springs, standardized frames, and washable linens. The bed went from a symbol of wealth and ceremony to a universal piece of household furniture available to all. The changing role of fire and light. In medieval nights, fire and candles were both comfort and danger. People feared falling asleep near flames, yet depended on them for warmth and light. As technology advanced, light became safer. Gas lamps and later electric bulbs extended the day far into the night. Heating systems freed people from needing to huddle by fires. The dangers of flames faded, and sleep became less anxious, less interrupted by the constant tending of hearths. Medical science and sleep, medieval medicine saw sleep as a matter of humors, diet, and posture. Doctors warned about sleeping on the wrong side, or too long, or in bad air. In the modern age, science redefined sleep. Researchers studied dreams, brainwaves, and sleep cycles. By the 20th century, sleep was no longer a mystery of humors, but a biological process. Yet echoes of medieval advice remain. We still hear recommendations about not eating too heavily before bed, about balance, and about keeping the body aligned properly. From fear to comfort. Perhaps the most striking change was emotional. For medieval people, sleep was filled with fear. Fear of demons, fear of witches, fear of fire, fear of plague. The night was a dangerous realm, and prayers and charms were needed to guard against it. Today, for many, sleep is seen as comfort, even luxury. Bedrooms are decorated, beds are chosen for softness, and sleep itself is treated as wellness. What was once survival has become a ritual of rest. Echoes that remain still, fragments of medieval sleep survive in us. Many people still wake in the night, echoing the old pattern of segmented sleep. Pets curl at our feet, reminding us of the animals once kept in medieval homes. Bedtime prayers and lullabies remain, softened into children's rhymes. Even the fear of the dark lingers. Nightmares, shadows, and the unease of waking suddenly remind us that sleep has always been a vulnerable, mysterious act. Imagining the long journey. Close your eyes now and imagine the path of sleep through history. A peasant family curled on straw, a pig grunting beside them. A noble lying in a velvet-curtained bed, servants nearby. A monk rising at midnight to chant psalms by candlelight. A traveler in an inn, squeezed between strangers. A child tucked in with herbs and charms for protection. And finally, your own bed, clean, private, warm, shaped by centuries of change. From straw to springs, from demons to dreams, from fear to comfort. The story of sleep is the story of humanity itself. Closing thought. So as this journey ends, remember, your bed tonight is the heir of centuries. It carries the weight of medieval straw, noble velvet, monastic discipline, and plague-time prayers. When you close your eyes, you join a long history of sleepers. Those who feared the night, those who prayed through it, those who worked in it, and those who dreamed in it. Sleep is never just sleep. It is tradition, memory, and the quiet history of the night. And with that, may your own sleep be safe, peaceful, and perhaps just a little wiser for knowing the story of those who came before.